Rome wasn't built in a day, and its republic wasn't destroyed in one either. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March 44 BC did not save the republic, it merely plunged it into darkness. For 13 long years, the Roman world was torn apart by brutal civil war, a chaotic power struggle between ambitious generals and feuding politicians. Out of this blood-soaked chaos, one man emerged supreme. He was young, frail, and constantly underestimated. His name was Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew, and, crucially, his adopted son and heir. When Caesar died, Octavian was just a teenager, but he possessed a chilling political intellect that none of his rivals, grizzled generals and powerful senators, saw coming. He formed a tense alliance with his rival, Mark Antony, to hunt down Caesar's assassins. Once that was done, they inevitably turned on each other. The final showdown came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. This wasn't just a battle, it was a war of propaganda. Octavian, in Rome, painted Antony as a decadent Eastern puppet bewitched by the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, abandoning his Roman heritage. He was selling a return to traditional Roman values, and Rome, exhausted by decades of war, bought it. With Antony and Cleopatra defeated and dead, the 36-year-old Octavian was the undisputed master of the Roman world. But he faced a critical problem. How do you rule as a king without calling yourself one? Romans had overthrown their last king centuries ago. They hated the title. This is where Octavian's genius truly shines. He didn't declare himself dictator for life as Caesar had. Instead, in 27 BC, he walked into the Senate and announced he was restoring the Republic. He gave back all his emergency powers. It was the single greatest political performance in history. In gratitude, the Senate begged him to stay in charge. They gave him new powers, new titles. They named him Augustus, the revered one. He immediately bought the Praetorian Guard's loyalty with a massive bonus, setting a dangerous precedent. But once in power, he proved to be a shrewd and effective ruler. He stabilized the empire's finances, which Caligula had ruined. He built 2 new aqueducts for Rome, the Aqua Claudia and the Anio Novus. He also built a massive new port at Ostia, which was critical for securing Rome's grain supply. And most famously, he ordered the successful Roman conquest of Britain in 43 AD, something even Julius Caesar had failed to achieve. He was a micromanager, personally judging legal cases and involving himself in every aspect of government. But his greatest weakness was his personal life. He was easily manipulated by his powerful wives and his freedmen, former slaves who ran the imperial bureaucracy. His third wife, Messalina, was notoriously unfaithful and was executed after she married another man in a public ceremony while Claudius was away. His fourth and final wife was his own niece, Agrippina the Younger. She was ambitious, ruthless, and had a son from a previous marriage. She convinced Claudius to adopt her son and name him as co-heir, ahead of his own son, Britannicus. Once her son's position was secure, Claudius's time was up. In 54 AD, he died, allegedly poisoned by Agrippina with a plate of mushrooms. His death cleared the way for her son to take the throne. 5. Nero. That son was Nero, and his reign, starting in 54 AD, is one of the most infamous in Roman history. He was only 16 years old. His first 5 years, however, were known as a golden age. Guided by his capable advisors, his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, the empire was governed well.
But the young emperor cared less for politics and military matters and more for poetry, music, and chariot racing. He fancied himself a great artist. He performed on stage, singing and playing the lyre, which horrified the traditional Roman elite, who saw such activities as undignified. As Nero grew older, his darker side emerged. He grew tired of his mother Agrippina's constant interference. In 59 AD, he had her murdered, allegedly after a failed attempt to drown her in a specially designed collapsible boat. Then, in 64 AD, the Great Fire of Rome ravaged the city for 6 days, destroying vast swaths of the capital. Rumors spread that Nero himself had started it. The historian Tacitus wrote that as the city burned, Nero was on his private stage, singing about the fall of Troy. This is the origin of the Nero fiddled while Rome burned myth. While he almost certainly didn't start the fire, he was out of town when it began and rushed back to lead relief efforts, he quickly took advantage of the disaster. He used a vast, cleared area in the center of the city to build his new palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. It was an incredibly opulent, sprawling complex, which made him even more unpopular. To deflect the blame for the fire, Nero needed a scapegoat. He found one in a new, unpopular, and poorly understood religious sect, the Christians. He launched the first great persecution, arresting and executing Christians in brutal ways, allegedly using them as human torches to light his garden parties. Finally, the empire had enough. In 68 AD, the armies in the provinces, led by the governor of Gaul, Vindex, revolted. Other generals soon joined. The Senate, sensing the shift in power, declared Nero an enemy of the state. Abandoned by his own Praetorian Guard, the 30-year-old emperor fled the palace. He took his own life with the help of a servant, his famous last words being "Qualis artifex pareo," meaning, "What an artist dies with me." His death was a relief to many, but it created a massive problem. Nero was the last of Augustus's line. The Julio-Claudian dynasty was over, and with no clear heir, Rome was left rudderless, plunging it into its first great civil war. This was the year 69 AD, a year of chaos, anarchy, and ambition. The Praetorian Guard and the powerful legions on the frontier realized a fatal secret. An emperor could be made outside of Rome. 6. Galba. The first man to claim the throne was Servius Sulpicius Galba, the elderly governor of Spain. He was a disciplined, old-school aristocrat from a noble family. He marched on Rome with his legions and was officially recognized by the Senate. But he made a series of fatal mistakes. The empire was in financial trouble, and Galba was strict and stingy. He refused to pay the Praetorians the bonus they had been promised for their support, famously saying, "I am accustomed to recruiting soldiers, not buying them." This was a disastrous error. He also alienated the legions on the Rhine frontier. He was old, unpopular, and had no charm. His reign lasted just 7 months. On January 15, 69 AD, the Praetorian Guard, having been bought by another man, turned on Galba. He was hunted down and murdered in the Roman Forum, his head paraded on a spike. 7. Otto. The man who bought the Praetorians was Marcus Salvius Otto, a former friend of Nero. He was wealthy, ambitious, and part of Nero's inner circle. With Galba dead, the Senate had no choice but to recognize Otto as the new emperor. But Otto had a problem. Before Galba had even been killed, the legions on the Rhine's frontier in Germany had already declared their own commander, Vitellius, as emperor. Vitellius's armies were already marching on Italy. Otto, now in Rome, had to raise an army to meet them. The two forces met at the First Battle of Bedriacum in northern Italy. Otto's forces were defeated. Seeing that his cause was lost and not wanting to drag the empire into a prolonged civil war, Otto made a surprising decision. He took his own life. It was a surprisingly noble end for a man who had seized power through betrayal. He had ruled for only 3 months. 8. Vitellius. So, Aulus Vitellius marched into Rome victorious. He was known for his leadership or military skill, but for his legendary gluttony. His reign was essentially one long, extravagant feast. He spent his short time in power squandering the treasury on lavish banquets, alienating the Senate and the people of Rome. He was a man with no political skill who had been pushed into power by his soldiers. He didn't know that on the other side of the empire, the legions had other ideas. The powerful armies in the east, in Judea and Syria, were disgusted by the chaos in Rome and the incompetence of Vitellius. They had chosen their own emperor, a rugged, no-nonsense, and highly respected general named Titus Flavius Vespasian. We know him as Vespasian. He was not a noble from one of Rome's ancient families. He was a new man, a practical soldier from a humble background who had risen through the ranks on pure merit. He was in the middle of suppressing the great Jewish revolt in Judea when the news of Nero's death arrived. While Otto and Vitellius were fighting in Italy, Vespasian and his allies were biding their time. Once Vitellius took the throne, Vespasian made his move. He secured Egypt, the source of Rome's grain supply, and sent his legions, led by his ally Mucinus and the general Antonius Primus, to march on Italy. The forces of Vespasian and Vitellius met at the Second Battle of Bedriacum. It was a bloody, decisive slaughter. Vespasian's forces won. Vitellius, back in Rome, was captured. He was dragged through the streets, tortured, and finally killed, his body thrown into the Tiber River. On December 21, 69 AD, the Senate officially recognized Vespasian as the new emperor. The year of the 4 emperors was finally over. The chaos had ended. The Julio-Claudian dynasty was gone, replaced by a new dynasty born from the battlefield. In a single, bloody year, Rome had 4 different emperors. The chaos proved that the true power no longer lay with the Senate in Rome, but with the legions on the frontier. An emperor could be made anywhere. Vespasian, the last emperor standing, was different. He was the practical, common-sense general the empire desperately needed. He would bring stability, restore the empire's finances, and build one of the most iconic structures in history. In our next episode, the common-sense general, his beloved son, and his tyrannical brother. This is the story of the Flavian dynasty.